All right. Well, welcome everyone to the third and final session of the Federal Supplier Accelerator series. My name is Joe McCannon, and I'm with the Office of the Federal Chief Sustainability Officer in the Council on Environmental Quality. And along with our partners from the General Services Administration, we're once again really looking forward to the session we have arranged today, which um, shifts us to talking about Scope 2 and specifically federal government incentives and programs that can help you as suppliers to accelerate your Scope 2 investments in purchasing carbon pollution-free electricity, or what we'll be calling CFE here today. I'm going to turn to colleagues from the Green Power Partnership at EPA in just a moment to dig into that. But before I do that, I do just want to take a moment to just remind us all of the nature of this series and the flight you're on, so to speak. So basically what we're trying to accomplish. So our goal is to make sure you are aware of the great federal programs and tools and resources that are available to you, so that you can accelerate your efforts on Scope 1 and 2 emissions, which will help us as we work on tackling our Scope 3 emissions across the federal government, and which should help you in conversations with your suppliers as well. We'd love for you to walk away with a sense of a particular program, or maybe a particular tax incentive that you'd like to pursue along the lines of what we discussed in our session on the Biden-Harris administration's Inflation Reduction Act programs last week. And we'll be delighted too if you share what you learn with others. In our first two sessions, if we go to the next slide, we approach this by both laying out cross-cutting government programs like the Better Climate Challenge, and cross-cutting tools and platforms from EPA and GSA. That was session one. And then also by digging last week into the IRA incentives I just mentioned, which can be used for investments in microgrids, in building efficiency projects, clean vehicle projects, clean vehicle infrastructure projects, and more. And then today, as I said, we're going to share tools that can help you accelerate your procurement of carbon pollution-free electricity, which is something that we've really prioritized ourselves across the federal government, in an attempt to make sure that we purchase as much clean energy as possible and meet a goal that was laid out for us in an executive order, Executive Order 14057, which stipulates that we as the federal government have to achieve 100% carbon pollution-free electricity on a net annual basis by 2030, and also achieve 50% 24/7 carbon pollution-free electricity by 2030, in order to try to decarbonize the grid even faster. I'm going to let the experts kind of talk more about the finer points of CFE and purchasing CFE and that terminology in a moment, but I'm sharing that work with you and our efforts with you to say that we've developed a lot of our own related tools and resources, which are in many cases now being made publicly available, which we hope will be really helpful. In terms of the flow of today's session, during the 90 minutes we have today, we'll start with James Critchfield, Director of the Green Power Partnership at EPA, to take us through the fundamentals of purchasing CFE. And then Shushmita Jena from the Department of Energy is going to share an exciting tool they've developed, which can help you do a self-assessment and identify the most relevant CFE purchasing options for you. And then James is going to return to describe those options in a bit more detail and talk about how you might build the business case for this work. And then we're very lucky that before we close, we will have Ellen Zuckerman, Head of Energy Market Development for North and South America for Google, and Katie McGinty, Vice President and Chief Sustainability and External Relations Officer at Johnson Controls, to share their reflections with us on their CFE purchasing journey, and also kind of how they've approached and sustained their work on decarbonization more generally. So it's a super agenda that should leave you with hopefully a lot to chew on. And I'm going to hand the reins here to James in just a second. But before I do that, we did want to do a little bit of level setting and just try to get a handle on where you are in your own CFE purchasing journey. So we're going to ask you to just take 30 seconds to complete a one question poll that's going to pop up here now. And then that will help us tailor our session for you even more. So just take 30 seconds for that, and then we'll launch into things. All right, Allison, we can probably bring that to a close. And oh, look at that. That's really interesting. So I think we have a really kind of pretty even distribution of where people are in the journey. So some people pretty far along, others getting into process or just getting started. So we'll try to be mindful of that. We'll try to make sure that we're introducing the fundamentals here to start, but also acknowledge that some of you may have slightly more complex interests and questions based on your ongoing experience as we go forward. So James, there's a little bit of orientation there for you. I'll just kind of leave that in your lap and let you take it from here.
Great, thank you, Joe, and thank you for having us here today. It's exciting to be able to share some information with everyone. Obviously, for those of you that have been attending the last two webinars, you've probably heard mention of the Green Power Partnership. So what I'd like to briefly start with is just a little bit more information about the program. And then what I'll do is I'll launch into some of the carbon-free electricity discussion that we have today. So the Green Power Partnership has been around for more than 20 years. We launched the program in 2001. And the vision that we had for this program was to effectively work with consumers of electricity to make choices in how their power is generated. And by bringing that demand signal into the market, EPA was hoping to be able to influence effectively the way power is generated on the US electricity grid. We work with a large range of different organizations around the US. As you can see here, we work with Fortune 500 companies, higher education institutions, federal, state, and local governments, as well as a number of small and medium-sized businesses and nonprofits. Next slide. Here are some of the brand names that we have in our program. This is roughly about the top 70 or so companies. You can see organizations here like Google, Johnson Controls. We also have a number of large cities like Dallas, Texas, and Houston, as well as a number of higher education institutions. These companies are all taking credible actions towards advancing clean energy market here in the United States, and are doing it through credible practices that, in large part, the Green Power Partnership has contributed to help moving the market forward from a voluntary consumer perspective. Next slide. In terms of how you can engage with our program, the first thing I would recommend is just taking a look at the different resources and some of the technical support aspects of the program in helping you make a purchase for green power. Applying to the program after you've made a purchase is relatively simple and easy. There's a spreadsheet that we have available that's also linked on this slide that you can take a look at. That spreadsheet is something that you fill out and provide. It's an application, but it's also serving as a reporting form to EPA. And then once you are accepted into the program, you can get recognition for your leadership and performance over time in improving your procurement for green power as it's defined in the program. And then ultimately each year you'd be required to provide EPA a simple update using the same spreadsheet each year. And it's rather simple and straightforward. After that, you just provide continual improvement over time through this process. Next slide. So now I'm going to jump into a little bit around the topic of carbon-free electricity. I'm going to start from the top here, working down. We're going to talk about the electricity sources that generally contribute to power on the electricity grid. And as you can see, there's a wide range of different resources that produce power for consumers in the US. However, as we look lower in this kind of chart, there is different definitions of renewables, carbon-free, green power that encompass different resource types. Today, we're going to be jumping a little bit between some of these definitions, but I think the thing that you need to take away from this is that different resources offer different opportunities, as well as have different costs and benefits for you as an organization. So when we're talking about carbon-free electricity sources, we're generally talking about those that do not emit any emissions through the process of producing electricity. Renewable resources, however, have a distinctive difference in that there are some resources that are viewed generally as renewable, but they may have different emissions outputs in the production of electricity. Two examples are biomass and biogas, which in their combustion to produce electricity do actually emit carbon emissions to the atmosphere. Some renewable definitions through state renewable portfolio standards, which are an RPS or renewable portfolio standard is a state policy that defines how much renewable resources and generation should be provided to ratepayers, sometimes also include municipal solid waste as a renewable resource. But municipal solid waste in many cases, because here in the United States is not a separable waste stream, meaning that it is inclusive of things like plastic and other materials that when combusted also produce emissions. Municipal solid waste doesn't necessarily result in a lower emissions footprint. It can have a carbon intensity closer to a natural gas plant, for example. And in fact, in certain state policies, large hydropower is not even included as a renewable resource, mostly because these state policies wanted to build on top of or be incremental to what is already existing on the grid. So large hydropower, having been built mostly in last century, is not often included in renewable energy definitions broadly. Green power is a concept that is really focused on just the environmental profile of resources, and for the voluntary market in particular. These sets of resources really focus on those kinds of technologies and resources that more or less advance cleaner sources of generation. In this case, biomass and biogas is only eligible from a waste source perspective. So as we work through this discussion, I just want you to take away that carbon-free is a set of resources that do not emit. I will be talking about, from a green power partnership perspective, maybe the green power sort of resources. So just keep that in mind as we walk through this discussion. Next slide. So just as a little bit of level setting, the electricity that comes through the grid and ultimately lands in our buildings where we consume it is really difficult and an ineffective way to differentiate what you're using and what produced your power. The electrons that flow across the grid are indistinguishable and undifferentiated, and therefore you can't really tell from your power outlet, for example, what you're actually consuming. And so physical power is often described in that context by a mix of generations. So You might be able to tell from your, or receive from your utility, the generation profile of what contributes to all of electricity. But what if you were wanting to make a private investment in carbon-free electricity and be able to claim that investment as yours and yours alone? How would that work? Next slide. Well, we happen to have created, as we have around the globe, a parallel system of market instruments that help describe the contractual relationship that consumers have to different sources of power. And these are called energy attribute certificates. And if in the case if an energy attribute certificate is produced by, say, a renewable resource, you might have heard the term renewable energy certificate. They're the same thing. A renewable energy certificate is just a type of energy attribute certificate from a renewable source. And these certificates are issued to generators across the United States by one of 9 different regional tracking systems or registries. And they are used to support commercial marketing claims between sellers and buyers of electricity, and be able to substantiate the amount of generation that is produced and delivered to the grid, and ultimately support consumer claims of consumption of that electricity, where the physical electrons don't really inform that from an effective perspective. So not all tracking systems, however, are currently tracking carbon-free electricity resources such as nuclear and large hydropower. Therefore, one of the things that we're seeing happening right now as we think about carbon-free electricity is that we're starting to focus on trying to advance these tracking systems to be able to track at that level of resource availability, so that consumers that want to buy carbon-free electricity can move that direction. However, you can always buy, in many cases, renewable energy from all these systems. So that is a good place to start, as we'll find out. One thing I do want to mention is that energy attribute certificates are different than project offsets. Project offsets is a different type of instrument that is actually measured in tons of emissions reductions, while as energy attribute certificates are energy instruments that are measured in megawatt hours. These are 2 different tools that companies use to reduce their carbon footprint. It's useful to think about these 2 tools as different, having different purposes in your carbon footprint reduction strategy. Next slide. One other thing that's worth mentioning here as far as the role of energy attribute certificates that tracks back to the Federal Trade Commission and their green guides, which is a set of guidance that they put out related to consumer protection issues, is that if you are a seller or a supplier of renewable energy or a buyer of renewable energy that wishes to make a marketable claim about what you've purchased, the Federal Trade Commission does require that you validate and verify your claims around renewable energy and presumably carbon-free energy as well, with renewable energy certificates or energy attribute certificates. So it's really important as a buyer to just understand that if you are going to be making renewable energy claims or carbon-free electricity claims, that you are able to substantiate those claims with market instruments. Next slide. So if you're to take one thing away from today's discussion on sort of credible claims, is you're not using carbon-free electricity unless you have both the EAC and the electricity together. So that's really, really important to remember. Next slide. So the idea of voluntary procurement has been around since about 1997. The Green Power Partnership was a program that was developed to leverage voluntary buyer demand in the market to essentially reduce the carbon intensity of the US electricity sector. And coming from that, there are a number of different principles that voluntary buyers follow in the market that I think are worth pointing out. First and foremost is that you need to make a proactive choice for how your power is generated. So consumers being able to exercise a choice for their power and where it comes from is really critical to the voluntary buyer and their ability to affect change and make a difference on emissions broadly on the grid, but also within their own footprint. I also would say that going above and beyond what you would have otherwise received absent proactive procurement is a good way to ensure that you're making a difference. Voluntary procurement has always been surplus or incremental to what the consumer would have otherwise received from the grid due to mandates or requirements placed on load serving entities, or what is part of the standard offer service. If you just rely on what already exists, you're not really contributing to changing anything on the grid. So going above and beyond what you would have received is important. Focusing on newer generating sources is also an incredibly important part of advancing sort of new generating capacity on the grid. And choosing newer sources is a good way to focus your demand signal in the market. Investing in high quality environmental resources. So different resources have different effects. For example, hydropower may have different water quality issues or land use issues associated with it. Those may be things you want to support, maybe avoid, whatever, but just remember that different resources have different quality components in terms of their environmental profile. So making a choice for those that align with your strategy is important. Substantiating, again, all of your procurements with market instruments is also a core principle. Move to the next slide, please. So what are the supply options that you generally have available to you as a buyer in the US? We generally break these up between two different large buckets. One is retail options and the other is project-specific options. Retail options generally involve an intermediary, and that intermediary, such as a utility or supplier, generally in these cases would have a direct choice over the projects that ultimately serve your demand, and you have more of a subscriber role to a product or service that is being offered by the utility, such as in a utility green pricing program or green marketing program. With project-specific options, these are more reflective of bilateral arrangements that you as a consumer have direct connection to a specific generator that you've chosen, and then through that contractual or investment approach, have a real clear understanding of where you're getting your power from and have control over that through your choice. As you can see, there's a number of different supply options that come out of these two buckets. These are not widely or equally available across all parts of the country. So ultimately, if there's one thing that you need to think about, is you're going to have to manage a portfolio that applies to your circumstance and choosing supply options that deliver the benefits that you're looking to achieve through your procurements. Next slide. One of the other things that is worth thinking about is buying third-party certified products as a best practice in the market. Here in the United States, there is a standard called the Green E standard that applies to voluntary market and particularly retail products that are sold, although direct project engagement contracts can also be certified by Green E. But the Green E standard is really focused on giving consumers a clear market signal around what products have been third-party verified, and the certification mark that you can see up here in the upper right-hand corner offers value because it ensures that the product that you are purchasing meets a national standard for quality and content, meaning the underlying resources are of quality, and then also ensuring that what is being marketed to you is backed by verified contracts. And then ultimately making sure that the environmental attribute certificates that the retail supplier is procuring on your behalf to supply that program is also, those have been retired and ensured that they're not being double claimed by other buyers in the market. So this provides a bit of value in that, particularly in the retail space, where the cost of this verification and third-party engagement is borne by all subscribers to a particular product rather than each individual buyer having to do that on their own. It's worth mentioning, though, that under the Green Power Partnership and also just generally by, from the federal government, this is not something we're requiring or needs to be required. You can certainly buy renewable energy or carbon-free energy without a certification, but it is a good consumer best practice to perhaps consider it. Here in the Green Power Partnership, more than 86% of all reported retail green power is certified. So it is something that most of our partners are pursuing. And even about 30% of all direct project engagement contracts that are reported to EPA are also certified green E. Green E also has recently offered a federal certification option that would designate products that meet Executive Order 14057 for carbon-free electricity resources. So if you find the Green E mark associated on a federal certification level, you can know that that product is delivering carbon-free electricity that the US federal government is also trying to pursue. Next slide, please. So there are largely 3 different voluntary procurement strategies that we see in the market today. The first one that I'll talk about is the annual strategy, which is really a volumetric matching of generation to consumption within the same electricity market. This has been the kind of the incumbent strategy that's been around for more than a couple decades. Organizations who pursue this strategy really sum up the amount of electricity they use within market, and in this case, that would be the United States. And you would count how much your operational use of electricity is and buy an equal amount of renewable energy or green power on the market and verify that through energy attribute certificates. Alternatively, a couple of additional strategies that have emerged more recently is granular matching, sometimes referred to as 24/7 hourly matching. But this is a more granular approach where you would be doing the same matching of generation to consumption, but you would be doing so on a more geographic and temporal basis, in many cases on an hourly within balancing authority level. This approach sort of provides a better clarity around the actual delivery of the physical power being, to your operations. It also values the power a little more around the clock and geographically in terms of what you're getting and when you may need to make investments in order to achieve full hourly usage of renewable or carbon-free electricity around the clock. The emissions first strategy is slightly different. In this case, you're targeting your investments in carbon-free electricity that optimize those investments for avoided emissions on the grid. So targeting those investments in parts of the grid where perhaps the carbon intensity is highest. But again, this would be within the same electricity market, generally a national level of trying to pursue lower emissions energy investments and higher emissions regions of the US. Next slide. As you start to move along your journey, one of the things that you're going to need to think about is your operational footprint. Where you are consuming electricity is going to perhaps make some decisions for you on perhaps the strategy you want to take, what kinds of access you have to different supply options, the types of resources that are available to you. For example, you might start off with buying carbon-free electricity for a single facility. You might expand that to a group of facilities in a particular region of the US, and then ultimately move your way towards building a portfolio across your full US operational footprint, and even more globally for that matter. The Green Power Partnership is a domestic focused program, so we work with partners to effectively address emissions here in the US within their US operational footprint. But just think about where you are and what kind of operational footprint you have is really going to determine some of the opportunities that you have in front of you. Next slide, please. So right at this point, what you should be thinking about is you've been traveling a road that's probably been rather flat and straight and easy about how you buy renewable electricity. And what you're going to have to think about is taking maybe a different road about, focusing on buying carbon-free electricity. That road may be a little bit twisty, windy, uphill, maybe a little less certain at this moment in time, especially for those of you that are trying to figure out how to do this for the very first time. It may be a little bumpier than what you've done in the past. But I think really, just to, kind of fall on this metaphor, is that it's a little bit different, but it's really a journey. So next slide, or advance, please. So buying carbon-free electricity is very much a journey. It's you're going to need to set realistic goals to start with. You're going to need to measure your electricity use to understand, how much you need to buy, where you need to buy it. You're going to need to assess the market and the policy environment where you operate to understand what kind of options you have available. Can you advance to one more slide? And then you're going to need to estimate what kinds of cost and benefits you can get out of the different supply options. And then ultimately, you're going to need to take action and make a purchase. This is a journey in the sense that you need to start and evolve your portfolio over time to drive greater benefits. You don't need to start off with trying to achieve full encompassing procurement across all your operations. Get accustomed to it. Part of the challenge with buying carbon-free electricity that we found in our program is it takes a while to get through, getting it into your business operations and basically finding out what works for you from a cost and benefit perspective. And of course, joining EPA's Green Power Partnership is always a good option to consider at some point. So with that, I think we're ready to move on to NREL.
Yes, yeah, thanks, James. Really appreciate that. That's really helpful and gives us a really nice foundation, I think, for the rest of our session here today. And our next presenter, Shushmita Jena, who is a researcher at the National Renewable Energy Labs at the Department of Energy, is going to build on what James has presented by sharing a tool that should really help you identify the CFD options that make most sense for you. So, Shushmita, let me turn it straight over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, James. It was a wonderful introduction to this tool and what this tool does. Before we actually move to the tool, slightly a little bit about my research interest. My research interest is in market expansion for voluntary procurement pathways for large commercial industrial buyers of renewable energy. And in pursuit of these topics, we have developed this tool, and we also produce research to expand markets. It's a pleasure to be here. Next slide, please. Before we get into the procurement analysis tool, a few words about NREL. NREL is one of the 17 national labs spread out across the US and supported by the Department of Energy. We carry out research for the Department of Energy. You can think of us as the research arm for DOE's mission. As the name suggests, our focus is on renewable energy. Different labs have different focus again. And the main lab is in Golden, Colorado. We have other offices as well in other places across the US. Like this slide describes nicely, our research interest and research expertise is around renewable power, sustainable transportation, energy efficiency, and also energy integration. Like you can see, we are ever growing, about 2,500 researchers working on all these different topics. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a slide which basically tells about the impetus behind the tool, that is the procurement analysis tool, the tool that we are discussing today. There are different kinds of buyers of renewable energy. There are corporates, there are large commercial industrial buyers, local governments, and many other groups really, who are aspiring to buy renewable energy because they have made a commitment or want to achieve net zero goals. They can either buy energy through on-site installations. Think about rooftop, think about parking lots and so on, or off-site procurement. Now, an on-site may work for some small load, but for larger corporations with large loads, off-site procurement is a preferred method. This is, again, not to say that large corporate companies only buy through off-site procurement, but companies will employ a combination of these options available to develop their strategy and buy power. Getting into the options themselves, for on-site options, NREL has established tools such as the System Advisory Model, or SAM, the Renewable Energy Optimization Model, or REOPT, and Slope. These are the different platforms that will help you analyze your on-site load. But for off-site procurement options, we were lacking a tool in our suite of tools, and hence we created Procurement Analysis Tool to help analyze these different supply options or mechanisms available in the market. There are some tools that are in the market, but they are currently behind paywall. Now, I want to emphasize here that this tool is free of charge, and just like any other tools that we have or produce at NREL. So you can simply go register and start using the tool. Sometimes you do not even have to register to use the tools. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a web-based platform, so you do not need to download any apps or such. What you're seeing on the extreme left, that will the QR code will help you use the tool, or even the link to the tool is right here. Once you have it, you should be able to log in and start using the tool. You have to create, at this point, a user ID, and then you can just simply input the data and start using the tool. So you can create an account, like I told, free of charge. You can analyze your load for utility scale renewable energy or off-site renewable energy procurement options. PAT helps you analyze the information to identify potential wind, solar, or storage resources, and any other suitable procurement options, such as power purchase agreement, green tariffs, whether they are on-site or off-site. You should be able to look at all these options that align with your budget, the location, and your sustainability goals. Currently, we have close to about 200 large buyers using this tool. And again, like on the left, that what you're seeing on the left is what the web page looks like. The next slide, please. This is about the key groups and what these groups look like. Here's a distribution of the types of users. Almost half of the users are corporates or consulting organizations who are helping the corporates buy renewable energy. And the other half are researchers, local governments, and so on. As the tool user base expands, which is rapidly expanding at this point, we expect the majority of these users to be buyers, and proportionally, the number of researchers would be probably much less here. Also, what can PAT help answer? That's a question that we should be asking ourselves. PAT can help you basically give two options. One is what kind of procurement mechanisms exist for your load, and what are the resource regions where these options exist. And within that, there is more nuance and more questions that it can help you answer, meaning how do different resources and procurement options vary on cost, impact, and any other attribution or any other way you want to really slice this information. It can help you with all of that, which we will see in subsequent slides here. Of course, you can optimize in many different ways. Primarily, these are the questions it can help you answer. The next slide. Thank you. This is a setup of PAT. The key inputs and outputs are here. On the left here are the 3 input pages, and on the right, which is in green, these are the 2 output pages that you will see. And these 3 input pages are, like you can see, the scenario setup itself, the load aggregation grouping, and the fine-tuning of these preferences, really, to get the options that are best suited for your situation. And using these, it optimizes and spits out the results that you're seeing on the right. That's the procurement options and the resource regions. The next slide, please. Okay, this is where the PAT walkthrough actually begins. So far, we were setting up what PAT is for and so on. Right now, what you're seeing is what you will see once you log in and start inputting or creating a scenario. So you are seeing what you will see when you begin to use PAT. That's the picture. This is a basic info page or the first page of the input pages. Remember, there are 3 input pages. The first one is about setting up the scenario and giving out the basic information. This is where you set up the scenario, put a name, notes, and your renewable energy goal. In this picture, if you look at the blue arrows on the right, you will see that I have pointed them towards the right of the screen here. And there are simple text entries. On the slide, I have 100% for renewable energy goal, but you can put anything here you want and look up the results, or change multiple scenarios and look up the results. For example, here, if your goal is 100% renewable energy here and your load, for example, again, is 100 megawatt hour, the analysis is run for obtaining 100% of 100 megawatt hours, which is 100 megawatt hours. But if you were to change this to 50%, then the analysis will happen considering the load becomes a 50 megawatt hours. That is the implication of changing the renewable energy goal. You can change as many times as you want and create different scenarios and see what works best for your journey, your procurement journey. The next slide, please. Okay, this is the second of the input page or the load aggregation group page. This is where you can create grouping for your load. The load groups can be assembled by region, say Northeast and Midwest, like you are seeing on the screen, and those little fingers is what you should be looking at. That's where you will click to create these load aggregation groups. And again, by size, you could be doing it by regions, like here I have done Northeast and Midwest, by size, like for large factory site or small operation site, by, let's say, type of services that you are offering, maybe large data centers and maybe distribution hubs. They are different types of services and different types of load. So that could be one of the one kind of assembly that you can do for the groups, or any other way that you want to really cut or slice your load and look at the different options that are available. That flexibility you have with the load aggregation group. Now, the reason this is important is that grouping load is how the analysis really runs, or the optimization happens at a load aggregation group level. In this example, the Northeast group is analyzed separately from the Midwest for renewable energy options. If you were to just create one group and all of these locations would be in one group, the analysis would look different than what it is looking right now. So that's the importance of creating these load aggregation groups. Remember, you have to just create one. You are not required to create as many as probably you're seeing on the screen, but the minimum number is 1 here. And once you create this group, you can add a location or facility info, which you will see in the next 2 slides. And in terms of functionality, the map to your right is clickable and has high resolution images with color coded pins to the load aggregation group themselves. The next slide, please. Okay, before we get into the input page of the location itself, here are a few case dimensions that I wanted to bring up before we jump into that discussion. Now, different case dimensions here could be power markets, whether your load is located in a restructured market or whether it is in a vertically integrated market. Same ways, the load aggregation group will have an impact on your results. Load serving entity, whether you're being served by a utility or a community choice aggregator, or who is your load serving entity, that will have an impact on the results. The load size as well, if it is a very large load versus a very small load, that's going to have an impact. And rec retention, like James mentioned, if you, for any reason, you want to not retain the renewable energy certificates, and then we will give you a little alert saying that you are not really buying renewable energy at this point. And on the right, you are seeing the sample use cases. It could be a group of universities that are spread out nationwide, and you are creating one load aggregation group. Again, it can be multiple load aggregation groups as well. It could be small coffee shops, let's say in Washington, D.C., which is a small, very small load. It could be one large load in Texas, which is a completely restructured market. It is not a one-to-one combination here. Again, I want to remind, different combinations of these case dimensions combined with different types of use cases is going to give you a multitude of options to really play with and to really tinker with the different parameters and look at the results. So that's something to really remember here. And before we get into the facility details, I just want to sorry, I think I'm experiencing a little lag here. Next slide, please.
Yep, Shushmita, I can tell you that we can hear you okay, and just giving you a 10-minute time warning too.
Yes, absolutely. Packed walkthrough again. This is on the facility input page or the second input page that we were looking at. This is the facilities and location page. This is where you add the name, the location, and the annual load, and also the load serving entity. If the load serving entity is the only one, if there's only one load serving entity in your region, then that is selected for you by default. Else, you will get options of different load serving entities, and you will have to upload the one, you have to select the one that is actually serving your load. And these are all pointed by these blue arrows. Once you have the slide, you can basically use this as a guidebook and develop your own scenarios. The next slide, please. This is the location summary. In a sense, what this slide is, everything that you have created so far, that's the 2 input pages and the setup, this is what is visible in one summary page. There's no input that's required, but at the end of creating all these with the location summary, this is what it'll look like. Now onto the third and the last input page, which is the next slide. Yes, this is the filter question page. We have a few filter questions here. We call them filter questions. What they are is refining questions. Based on your preferences, you will be able to really select or say a yes, no, and or unsure. And based on how you answer, that's going to impact your ultimate output. There are about 7 to 9 questions here, depending on whether you answer yes or no to certain questions. For example, the first question here is whether you have adequate or enough energy procurement experience or not. If you say no, then we will probably not show you certain options which are more complicated to execute than the others, such as a power purchase agreement. And if you say yes to that, then power purchase agreement will be visible to you as an option. And that's the same with financial risk. If you are risk averse or you do not want to be exposed to too much of price hedging, then we will not give you certain options that you would otherwise get if you say yes to these answers. Similarly, you have questions on geography, on grid impact, and on different balancing authorities. Different questions, different combination of questions and answers will impact your output. The next slide, please. This is a screen recording. If you can play it, it's a small screen recording which basically shows you how changing the answer impacts the procurement options that are available. It's a small one. It's possible that you will miss it, so I'll not spend more time on this. Next slide, please. Yes, here is where the output begins. So 3 pages of inputs that you saw, and these are the 2 output pages that you will see, the first of the output page. At the top, you see 100% of the load is met, given the scenario that I had created, and give you snapshots of the total load we were analyzing. That's what you're seeing at the second level, the total capacity that may be required to fulfill the load, the energy generated estimates, and the source of power. It selects the resource regions based on the optimization criteria. And here, the optimization criteria that's selected is cost. At any point, you have a choice to actually go back and change any of these optimization criteria. So you could select emissions, or you could select grid value, and likely you will see options for battery, or you will see options for solar. Right now, given the entire situation and all the selections that we have had in the previous filters page and optimizing for cost, these are the two resource regions that have been selected. Again, I want to emphasize here that these are resource regions. These are not actual projects which are available out there for you to go and buy energy from. This is where the resource potential is. Based on this information, you will have to go through the negotiation process with your load serving entity, and they will be able to tell you where this power would be and what this project will look like and how you'll be able to procure power. So these are modeled results. That's what I want to emphasize on. The next slide, please. This is the procurement options page. At the top, what you're seeing is how the page will look like on your user refinement page or your filters page. So these are just the procurement options like, let's say, unbundled renewable energy certificates, community solar, or virtual power purchase agreement, and so on. At the bottom, what you're seeing is how the page looks like on the procurement options page. And here is where you'll get that granularity that you might be looking for. So at the very top here, you're seeing the load aggregation page itself. Here in this case, it's Northeast. And then you are seeing the options that are available for that particular load aggregation group. And what I have highlighted in the page below is the power purchase agreement. Now, for power purchase agreements, we have some amount of price granularity, and that's available in public domain. We collect that information and put it out there so that while you're going through the process of analysis, you have more data points to make that decision. Again, this kind level of granularity is not available for all procurement options, but for some it is available. The next slide, please. This is a consolidated results page. The next two slides are basically that. Everything that you saw in the first two results page are in the consolidated view. This is what you will see. Here, I have just opened up that slide. It's a deck, and I have opened it, and it looks like this. All the options that are available in the Northeast procurement options is available here as well. The next slide, please. And if I close the drawer, this is what the view looks like. So in one page, you are able to just download all of this information and run your further analysis. And all the options that are available to you are visible to you here in this consolidated page. The next slide, please. Yes, we are almost done with the tool. The next steps, I just want to bring this to everyone's attention that the PAT analysis has completed, but there are still more steps to be taken before you are actually able to buy power. And those steps could look different for different organizations depending on where you are in this journey. It could be that you will be running an RFI or RFQ request. There might be internal stakeholder analysis that's required. You might want to really look into one particular option that is available in your service territory. You want to have more information. That research is required. And then, of course, the negotiation and development of the projects itself. And that's when you will complete signing the contract and the power will be delivered. So in short, what I'm trying to say is that there are more steps to be taken. PAT is the initial screening analysis that you do. And based on that analysis, you will be taking more steps to buy renewable energy. The next slide, please. This is a quick software roadmap. It's a tool with, there are many more things that we want to do, and this is here for everyone's consumption, but I want to just highlight a few things here. We want to bring in some analysis from the on-site integration as well. So integration of REOPT to support more refined behind-the-meter integration. That is something that we are looking at. Bringing in more granularity for each of the procurement options that are available. That's also something that we are working on. So there is a short-term and a long-term goal, just like every other software roadmap. But that's all I think we should be talking about at this point, lest I confuse more people here. The next slide, please. This is where Pat ends, and I'm trying to talk about another tool, which is the CFE program availability map here, supported by the Federal Energy Management Program. In the next slide, we will see that utility CFE program availability map. This is a searchable database, and there are about 131 programs resulting in about 252, review of about 252 utilities. They are offering these programs. And it is not a tool like procurement analysis tool, but it's a database. And since in this series, we're talking about tools, this is one more tool that's available to you. Again, this is completely free of charge to any user. It has a nice dashboard, and it has a data viewer, a Tableau data viewer that you can select the information that you want to and review the tool. I will not go in detail, in great detail for this tool. I'll leave all these links for you to peruse. The next slide is about the different resources in the on-site CFE category and the off-site CFE category, including the map that I was talking about in the off-site category in this slide. And please feel free to peruse these. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer. The next slide is about on-demand trainings from FEMP, and there are many trainings that are available on their website. Again, it's all free of charge to you as a user. Feel free to review those and ask us any questions. I'm happy to take any questions later, or any feedback that you have for the tool. I'm happy to receive that. Thank you. With that,
yeah, no, thank you, Shusmita. We really appreciate that. And I think it's, we hope people will go to the link we put in the chat, and we promise we'll send these other links along too after the session. But really appreciate your time and the great work there. Because time is tight, I am going to hold on additional questions right now until the end, and bounce back now to James just for a little more insight on the options available to access CFE and thinking through the business case for pursuing those. And then our goal here is that at about 1:07, about 10 minutes from now, we'll turn things over and start our panel. So James, that's your task.
All right, next slide, please. So what we've really laid out here for you is that you're going to have to think about your procurements across three different aspects. One, you're buying electricity, so you need to consider how you're purchasing that. You're going to be interested, particularly from a bottom line or business case perspective, what that costs you. And then, of course, the environmental aspect of being able to credibly support your procurements. Next slide. We did a national assessment of access to green power. And I think the biggest thing that you need to think about is that the supply options we spoke about before are not uniformly available to all facilities or all companies across the US. And so the big finding from this report is that roughly about 22% of all non-residential electricity accounts in the US only have access to one supply option, which is unbundled RECs. Next slide. Here is a table that shows you a little bit around how access to each of these supply options falls out across the US. Obviously, there's some details in the depths of this that you'll have to research for your own circumstance. But again, here you can also see that these different supply options don't necessarily address each of the three E's of energy, economics, and environment. So once again, I just want to emphasize that the portfolio approach of being able to put together a series of different supply options for your organization is something that we see as a normal practice of business. You will build a portfolio and evolve that portfolio through time as you make procurements for carbon-free electricity. Next slide. A lot of people talk about leadership and impact. Am I making an impact? Am I doing something good for the environment, making a difference? I think what I would say is that, making a choice for your electricity is the first place to start, and all choices for carbon-free electricity are impactful. I think what you want to think about after that is Am I making a leading procurement? And leadership is defined a little differently. It's a slightly higher bar, perhaps, of customizing your procurements in different ways. But the most important thing is to really just make a choice, bring your demand to the market, and there's a range of supply options that allow you to do that. Next slide. The voluntary market has made a significant contribution over time to building the US clean energy economy. When we compare it to the compliance market, you can see that voluntary contributions are just short of what compliance has brought into the market in terms of megawatt hours of generation. So the voluntary market is not an insignificant driver for decarbonization. In fact, most of the new capacity that have been brought into the US market have been through voluntary commitments and new project build out. So you do have a substantive role to play in helping move the US clean energy economy forward. Next slide. Here is a tool that we have on the Green Power Partnership website. It's our project mapping tool. It shows all the investments that our partners have made through direct project engagements. On this tool, actually, you can focus in on some of these projects, and if the satellite photography is up to date, you can actually see the projects. I mean, this is a great opportunity to really validate how voluntary buyers can make a difference and how your investments in clean energy technologies can make a difference. And those tax incentives you heard on previous webinars are really accelerating the pace of development of these technologies. Next slide. So there are a number of trends that I think are worth mentioning that are sort of driving corporate and consumer buying action in the US. Some of you may be aware that recently different regulators, including the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as regulators in California, and even internationally in the EU, are requiring companies to disclose their climate risk, which means they have to report their emissions and disclose their operational emissions across their operating footprint. In addition to that, there are international trade issues that are coming to bear through emerging carbon border adjustment mechanisms. These are trade policies that'll look at products between a source country and that are imported into another country, and ultimately be viewed, the trade tariff will be applied based on the product's embedded emissions. There's also federal clean purchase programs or buy clean programs that are focused on the federal government as a buyer of products in the market. And those products are largely currently being focused on like heavy construction materials like steel, aluminum, glass, asphalt, and how the embodied emissions of those products can be evaluated so that consumers can buy products with lower embodied emissions. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol is an international standard that helps companies measure their emissions so they can manage them. These standards are going through a significant update, and how those standards will evolve will really determine how companies measure their emissions and report them. And then ultimately, we're seeing some of these emerging carbon-free procurement trends take hold in the market, granular matching and emissions first. So there's new ways to go about how you structure your portfolio of carbon-free electricity. Next slide. Every organization will need to make a business case for how they sort of pull their portfolio together. You know, what kinds of cost savings you can bring to the table through your investments. I will mention that retail options will almost always cost you more than your incumbent electricity use, whereas project specific options that we listed earlier in this webinar will have the opportunity to save you money. Risk mitigation. Does the supply option you've chosen provide you a hedge against the price volatility of energy markets and any sort of regulatory issue changes that you're exposed to? There's incentives. We've heard a lot about the new Inflation Reduction Act incentives and some of the availability of those to different technologies and reducing technologies. Your business case may be represented by your reputational risks of what you're buying and how your brand aligns with sustainability? Your customer loyalty. Do your customers value what you're doing in terms of sustainability? And does that become a metric for doing business in your supply chain and through your supply chain relationships? And then, of course, there's different aspects of resiliency. For those of you that are manufacturers and produce products, anytime you have a disruption in in the grid or the supply chain that reduces your operational efficiencies, that can be difficult for maintaining your business focus. And so ultimately making investments that support your resilience in that respect. Next slide. Just a few tools here that the Green Power Partnership offers. This guide to purchasing green power is a good place if you're just starting. Based on the poll that we took, there's a number of you that I think are just starting off. This is the place to go to kind of learn about buying green power for your operations. There's parts of this that have been authored by the EPA, DOE, World Resources Institute that manages the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, as well as the Center for Resource Solutions that offers the Green E certification, and the National Renewable Energy Lab, which we just heard from. Next slide. We also offer at EPA through the Green Power Partnership a project development toolbox resource. This is broken up into a variety of different aspects of the process of developing projects or engaging directly with projects. It addresses things like just the process itself, policy considerations and identifying policies that will influence your projects, financing approaches and the models that companies are using to finance and bring capital to the table to build projects. Ultimately, how to evaluate your project investments from an economic perspective, how to execute RFPs, that's a request for proposals. If you're going to try to build a project, you're going to need to go out and find developers. And of course, different guidance around designing contracts and making sure that you're thinking about the different elements of your contract agreements. And then ultimately, at the end, once you built the project, making sure that you're making credible claims. And so those resources are all available through this tool. Next slide. So I think we're going to move on from this point to, I'll turn it over back to you, Joe, to sort of lead us if we're going to take questions or move on to something else. Thanks.
Yeah, I think, James, we're going to hold for questions until the end. But I want to just say a big thanks to you and Shushmita both for all that insight and all those just really rich tools. And again, we hope people are going to be taking advantage of those. As always, we will send all registrants links to programs and resources that have been covered here so that you can really deepen your action or start your work, as the case may be. And to help you think through this even further now, and to kind of bring that process to life even more, we're really lucky to have two colleagues from the corporate sector who are suppliers to the U.S. government to share their reflections on how they've approached purchasing CFE and how they've approached the whole spectrum of activities we've covered in this program. So I'm going to turn to my colleague Katie Newhouse here, who leads our Scope 3 work to facilitate that. Katie.
Thanks, Joe. And hi, everyone. So happy that you all are here today and very excited to have both Ellen and Katie here. And one thing we really wanted to do here at the end of the series is turn back to a few suppliers and have them talk about their own experience, not only with purchasing CFE, but also using federal resources more broadly in their Scope 1 and Scope 2 efforts. So first we have Ellen Zuckerman here. Ellen, we could see you. Oh, now we can see you again. It looks like you are still muted, but excited to spend about 5 minutes kind of walking through some of Google's work and learnings in this area. So if you want to go ahead and just say a quick intro and then to talk a little bit more about how Google has approached CFE and the internal expertise it's taken. I know this has been a journey for Google, and so if you could share a little bit with the group, that would be great.
That sounds wonderful. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Oh, great. Hi, everyone. Really wonderful to share time with you all today. My name is Ellen Zuckerman, and I'm on Google's Energy Market Development team and oversee the North and South America portfolios. And this is an issue that my team is working on a daily basis. So really great to share some lessons learned and some of our experiences with you all. I think one of the things that I would highlight that's been really critical for Google is that we have established really ambitious goals, and those are a driving principle for us. So we started out with ambition of matching our load with 100% renewable energy. In recent years, we've evolved that to an even more ambitious commitment for 24/7 carbon-free electricity. And under that commitment, we aim by 2030 to power our operations around the clock with carbon-free electricity. And that truly guides how we approach our energy purchasing and how we show up in the market. In particular, the approach that we've taken is very localized. So it looks at the specific grids where we're operating. And so that requires us to work hand in hand with our utilities, engage with regulators and decision makers, which is a key component of all of this. In addition, by establishing the commitment for 24/7 carbon-free electricity, we've made a very conscious commitment to direct our resources, whether that's human or capital, on the leading edge of technologies and trying to figure out ways that we can accelerate deployment of carbon-free technology to enable decarbonization. So I would just really stress that having those ambitious goals that the team is all driving toward has been absolutely critical. Two other things that I would just highlight quickly is one of the big focus areas for our energy team is really expanding our toolbox. I was recently involved in an energy supply agreement out in the West, and getting to those higher percentages of CFE penetration really gets challenging, and it requires a lot of innovation and collaboration. We're looking and exploring ideas about funding weatherization, for example, as a means to bring more carbon-free energy to the grid. So thinking beyond just the supply side, but also the demand side. We're also innovating new tariffs like the Clean Transition Tariff, which we just filed for proposal in Nevada as a new concept to enable new procurement pathways. And then just quickly to touch on the diverse expertise in teams, I think one of the things that Google has done really well is it's equipped teams with really varied expertise, understanding that the challenges that we're facing are quite nuanced. So we have commercial structuring experts, we have regulatory experts, we have hedging experts, and we've tried to really build teams that are collaborative, but bring this varied expertise to the table, especially as we're working to deliver on our 24/7 carbon-free electricity commitment.
That's great. And on that last point, could you let us know what external or federal programs or resources you've utilized along the way?
Yes, and honestly, it was great to be a part of the earlier presentations because I learned about some new tools and I was taking notes about ones that I want to bring back to my team. So just kudos to you all for what you're pulling together. I think one of the things that I would highlight in particular, which is a little twist on your question, is one thing that we've found incredibly valuable is working with the federal government in states, especially where they have presence. A lot of this work that we're trying to do is innovative. It requires working with utility partners and regulators in novel ways, and having the federal government at the table also advocating for new tariff designs, for example, has just been really instrumental. So I would just celebrate the fact that you all have also established really ambitious commitments, and that's making a huge difference in terms of the ecosystem.
Great. Well, any final thoughts before we turn over to Katie McGinty?
No, just thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and just encourage people to reach out if there's any insights. We do try to post on our Google sustainability blog lessons learned as we move forward on our 24/7 carbon-free electricity commitment. So I would really encourage you all to take a look at those white papers, and if there's anyone that you would like to connect with on my team, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Ellen, for joining us today. Super helpful. And now we're going to turn over to Katie McGinty, the Chief Sustainability and External Relations Officer for Johnson Controls. Katie, we see you.
Hey, Katie, how are you?
Hi, great, thanks. So happy to have you here today. And we are excited to hear a little bit more today about Johnson Controls' journey. So to start with, we're hoping you can talk a little bit more about the organization's overall commitment to decarbonize and what was the source of that commitment.
You bet. And thanks to everyone. This has been an extremely informative program today. So it's thrilling to be a part of it. So Johnson Controls, for those of you who don't know us, we're 141 years young and totally dedicated to sustainable buildings technologies. Now, forever, HVAC, heating and cooling, has been a huge part of the energy and cost burden for our customers. So throughout that century and a half, nearly, it's been an objective of ours to drive energy down and to drive costs that our customers experience down. Today, I think we have taken that focus and made it a mission. And the mission is driven itself because buildings represent almost 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So every part of Johnson Controls is switched on to cracking that nut. And the good news is that through efficiency, electrification, and digitalization, we can change those buildings from a big climate burden to net zero or net energy positive. And let me just pick up on the renewable energy piece, and a high five to Jim and Sushmita. What terrific tools they've brought forward. So with us, picking up also what Ellen said, we always start with efficiency. Drive down dramatically how much energy you need anyway to run an operation. And then you round it out with renewables. That makes sense economically as well, because the efficiency pieces cash flow and then enable you to help pay for the renewable energy piece. For Jim's insights, let me just kind of be very transparent and share what was a rough journey for Johnson Controls on renewables, but where the Green Power Partnership Program has really helped. So when I started with JCI 5.5 years ago, we were trying to get into what turned out to be a really arm wrestle for virtual power purchase agreements, where it was a big competition and we'd fill out these elaborate RFPs, and then you'd get a shot at a project, and it was very disruptive. You've got 4 hours to get your CFO to sign this 12-year agreement. So very hard to do. We leaned into the Green Power Partnership. 1, it's easy to join. 2, we've learned a ton. And 3, it's been an honor to be recognized. And I'll tell you where we've come in that, and Sushmita touched on some of this too. Instead of being out there on our own, hey, we want renewable energy, and we're a big player. We've got 100,000 people, 2,000 locations, so we're not a small load. We really listen to the insights, and we've gone the direction of now working directly with renewable energy project developers, filling out an NDA or engaging in an NDA with them so they see our load profile and specific geographic locations. And now we have had just an abundance of project opportunities to choose from. To Sushmita's point, we've also worked with load serving entities, utilities, and others. And boy, has that made this journey a lot easier. And Katie, I'm just happy to say that from 5.5 years ago, when we were out there on our own, to the Green Power Partnership, where we sit today, as we think in 2025, we'll get to north of 50% of our electricity load as a company that is met or matched by renewable energy assets. And we've entered into, now we see we can do this. We've taken on a 2040 100% renewable energy commitment, and we'll make that through this kind of partnership, but also by starting with efficiency first and dramatically skinnying our load.
That's great. And I would love for you to share a little bit more in addition to your progress on renewables. Could you share some of the projects you've pursued that have been facilitated by the Inflation Reduction Act?
You bet. And so let me highlight a couple pieces overall of the incentives out there. First of all, the 179D program, really critical. It drives support for commercial energy efficiency investments, and it is a deduction. So even if your company is tax optimized and you think, can I use the credits directly or not? This is a deduction. And so it drops directly to the bottom line. Other key tools for us have been the investment tax credit and the production tax credit. Let me put all that together and I'll tell you about a project. So we've taken on very ambitious climate reduction commitments and mission reduction commitments ourselves. So we have scope 1, 2, and 3 science-based targets that align us in operationally to the 1.5 degree path under the Paris Accord, and similar ambition in terms of driving the efficiency of our products that our customers use. So we have gotten to about 70% of that target, and we went about 2 years ago to take on another big piece of the job, which was one of our biggest, oldest, most important factories. This is a must-run factory. And I'll tell you, when we opened the doors and looked really closely, we saw what maybe many of those participating today will find, which is a little bit of backlogged maintenance, deferred maintenance. And so we thought, my goodness, we're not going to be able to afford this upgrade. And here's what happened instead. We leaned heavily into energy efficiency. We upgraded the plant and realized the millions of dollars of operational savings that we could achieve. We've securitized those savings. We did the project as a service with little or no upfront cost, with the tax credits, with accelerated depreciation, and with 179D, that major project, huge, second biggest energy consumption plant in our fleet. We're now sitting at a 43% reduction in emissions, and we saved $960,000 a year in our energy and operating costs.
Wow, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing. And as we close here, any other lessons learned or insights you'd like to share with the group before we close out?
Yeah, I would just say, look, it's been a challenging time for business. You know, COVID and supply chain issues, and now 2 major wars in the world. And so there's been a lot of tumult. And I'm sure you're wondering, geez, is this a time when I can afford to lean into decarbonization? And I would just say that when you solve for decarb, what we're finding is, as my example shows, you are solving for capital preservation. You're solving for bolstering your bottom line and cutting costs. With the IRA benefits, you are driving upgrades of your facilities that enable you to be reliable and resilient and have those operations you can count on to drive your business. And at the same time, you get to really rally your troops and say, hey, we are doing right by our bottom line, our profits, and the planet at the same time. And I'll tell you, that's a combination that your competition won't be able to beat.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Katie. It was wonderful. I am going to invite Joe back on here. And Katie, you're welcome to stay. Oh, you're going off video. And then Joe, I think I'm going to turn it over to you. And I think it was great to hear from a couple suppliers, and thank you again to James and Shishmita today. It's been lovely doing this entire series and getting to dive into so many different topics. But over to you, Joe, for wrapping us up here.
Yeah, thank you, Katie and Katie and Ellen. I think really just appreciate the kind of combination of inspiration in what you had to say, but also I think kind of a nice sober assessment of what this really takes. And I have to say, Katie, that I'm really encouraged by the ways the IRA has been helpful to you in advancing your work, and once again encourage you all to take a closer look at those incentives and programs, which we covered in our prior session, and which will be available in a video recording, which we will we'll send out when we wrap up here. In our last few minutes, I do want to answer a question or two that you've raised in the chat. But before we do that, we do ask for your feedback to us through the survey that will come up on the screen here right now. And so as you fill that out, we will be preparing ourselves to answer a handful of the questions that you have sent in. But if you could fill that out now, that would be very much appreciated. All right. Well, we thank you for giving us your feedback there. It's very, very helpful to us. Well, informs us and helps us improve, and helps potentially inform us for future interactions with you all. So we're very grateful for that. I do just want to turn to Sushmita and James for one of the questions that's come up in the chat, which I think could be informative. A lot of the questions have been answered directly, but there was one question about utility green tariffs, and specifically how those differ from some of the other options that you were covering today. So could I ask maybe one of you to address that one?
Yeah, sure. I can take a stab at that, and James, feel free to add. Utility green tariffs and green pricing programs, we make a distinction between that in our reporting in the procurement analysis tool. And what they are is, in a non-restructured market, the utility offers these green programs to any large or small buyer who wants to buy renewable energy. In the green pricing program, it is not a long-term commitment type of program. It's a subscription-based service. You can typically log into your own utility portal and switch on the service for yourself, or sometimes write to someone and you can switch on the service. There's no long-term commitment. It's a month-to-month billing cycle. Typically, the utility will charge anywhere between 1 to 3 cents a kilowatt hour over and above your energy use, and they will retire the renewable energy certificates or the EACs on your behalf. That is your green pricing program. The green tariff program is more of a power purchase agreement, but it happens with the utility in between the generator and the buyer. And that's why sometimes it's called a sleeved PPA, and because it's sleeved through the utility. It's a long-term power purchase agreement, typically between 15 to 20 years, just like any other power purchase agreement. Things have to be negotiated. It's on a bilateral basis. But the thing with both these programs is that they are available where there is a vertically integrated market and restructuring hasn't taken place. Again, different flavors of power purchase, green tariffs are available out there. Some have more market risk, some have less. But then typically these are the big differences. There are many other nuances, but generally speaking, this is what's happening. I don't know if James wants to add something to this.
I think that covers it pretty well. There's, as you mentioned, it's really broken out across the different market structures, I think, in part, just with the traditionally regulated markets versus competitive marketplaces in different states. And then the more direct PPA approach is perfect.
Great. Well, thank you both for that. And, there are a few more questions in the chat that I see. I think many of them are kind of bespoke and focused on a specific geography. So we'll try to tackle those. But just with about 30 seconds to go here, just want to say, remind you that we'll send a follow-up note with relevant links and links to a new GSA website that will contain the recordings of the sessions we've held here over the last 3 weeks. And I do just want to most importantly say thank you to all of you for attending these sessions, to all of the excellent presenters in the series, to our colleagues today from Google and Johnson Controls. And I especially want to say thank you to our wonderful partners from GSA who really stepped in to help make this happen on a very tight time frame and under some really trying circumstances, including hurricanes, and we're just great partners all along the way. So thank you very much. Thanks to all of you listening in, and have a great day, and we'll be in touch with you all very soon. Take care.